Welcome, my friends, to another episode of Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. Today, we are joined by Rabbi Elan Segelman, who is the Rabbinic Director for PUAH in America. And if you don't know about PUAH, we are going to be talking about issues that they address related to infertility and other matters that come up in that field in Halacha. After studying in Israel for 2 years at Yeshivat Kerem B'Yavneh, Rabbi Segelman attained a BA in psychology from Touro College's Lander College for Men, as well as an MA from Touro College's Graduate School of Jewish Studies. Shortly after completing his Semicha, he was appointed as a Shoel U'Maishiv and Rebbe in the Lander College Judaic Studies program. And in 2016, Rabbi Segelman became the Rabbinic Educator at New York Medical College and Touro College of Dental Medicine in Valhalla, New York. Rabbi Segelman currently resides in Los Angeles, California, where he serves as the rabbi of Young Israel of Hancock Park, if I pronounced it correctly. And it is a pleasure to have you with us today to discuss some very critical, cutting edge, and I should say sensitive, but because that also very pressing halachic issues. So I think before we even jump in, I think we're going to talk a little bit about surrogacy and related matters. Maybe just fill me in and fill our listeners in on what is PUAH, what does PUAH do, and how is it relevant to our discussion for today?
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kurtz, for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be able to have this discussion with you and educate the masses because we have a lot to talk about. And as you mentioned, there are so many different cutting edge questions that are advancing by the day, and keeping up with the halachic, the halachic discussions are ever evolving. Keeping up with the times is really is a challenge, but that's a mission of PUAH's every single day. PUAH is an organization which helps the Jewish community with their infertility and reproductive health in so many different facets. We offer medical guidance for couples and for singles who have questions about their reproductive health, halachic guidance, how to navigate the halachic landscape of these complicated medical questions, emotional support for people who are going through it, financial support, because it's just sometimes just so expensive and sometimes even prohibitive for some couples, and we never want that to occur. And we have supervision in the labs. We have women who go into the laboratory while couples are doing their treatments to make sure that there are no mix-up of genetic material. His is his and hers is hers, and to make sure that the yichus of Klal Yisrael is really preserved and never questioned. And Baruch Hashem, we've caught a few mistakes, and that could be an episode in and of itself. The IVF mix-up. I don't know if you noticed, the New York Times had an article just a few weeks ago about a big mix-up in the United States.
Aye.
And it's something that we take very seriously. And that's basically PUAH as in a nutshell, helping the Jewish community navigate all different types of questions and issues related to reproductive health.
So when I hear about infertility questions in halacha, one of the first things that jumps to mind is the question of a woman that, based on her veset and based on when she's having her period, and going to the mikvah doesn't align with those days that she would most be likely to be able to conceive. That, to me, at least, I think is like the classical question, exhibit A, if you will. But it sounds like, having a whole organization built around the questions of halacha and fertility or infertility makes it sound like there's a lot more to be discussed even beyond that question. So what are the other kind of issues, just to give a few examples that PUAH is
Sure.
addressing?
Sure. Well, you mentioned early ovulation, ovulating before mikvah. That's a great example. Suppose a couple needs to do more invasive treatment. They need to have blood work or ultrasounds on Shabbos that fall out on Shabbos, or they actually have treatment scheduled for Shabbos. So how do we navigate Shabbos with their fertility journey? Often a doctor will want a semen sample from the husband. They do various testing on the woman, and now it's time to test the man, which in and of itself is a great question. At what point do we say that we've checked enough boxes and now it's time to check the male? What needs to be done before going to check the male? whatever that may be, at the point where the semen analysis is, let's say the rabbi, this couple's rabbi did give them the heter to go ahead and produce a sperm sample. What is the preferred method of procurement? How do you procure a sperm sample? Those are some classic questions. And then really what we want to talk about today is when those questions get a little bit more intense, so to speak, a little bit more complicated, sophisticated, and we start zooming out. And we're not talking about the couple themselves, but sometimes if a woman doesn't have sufficient ovarian reserve and she can't use her own eggs to have a baby, or for whatever reason a woman doesn't have a healthy uterus or a uterus at all, and they can't carry a pregnancy, and you need to go and look towards another carrier, a gestational carrier, someone who's going to carry that baby. So what is the status of the baby when it's carried by a woman who is not the biological mother, or if the woman who is carrying the baby is Jewish or non-Jewish? All of those different questions, which really before the fertility, the advancements in fertility and IVF came to the scenes, this was never a practical question, right? Before IVF came to the scene, the first IVF baby was born in 1978. Before that, we were never taking eggs out of a woman and then fertilizing that with sperm in the lab and then reimplanting, right, that embryo into a woman. That never had happened before. We find tshuvas early on. You have tshuvas from the Yavitz, for instance, who talks about inseminating a woman. So to take the sperm and to inject the sperm. So it's not derech tashmish. The couple didn't have intercourse in a natural, normal way, but they took the sperm sample and then inseminated the woman. So does that carry on the same status, let's say, of fatherhood? Is fatherhood determined because his sperm, his genetics, his DNA entered the woman and created a baby? Or is there something special, something unique, and something significant about the act of intimacy that creates fatherhood? The Gemara in Chagiga talks about a Kohen that a man, specifically a Kohen Gadol, let's say, that gets pregnant without intercourse. And the Gemara says, how can that happen? The Gemara says, Nisabra Bambati, if a husband, I'm talking about a Kohen who impregnates a woman. So how did that happen? If the Kohen can marry him. So the question the Gemara is asking is, can a Kohen Gadol marry a woman that's never had relations, but she got pregnant, right?
Right. So the big question is, to put it, I guess, into like the yeshivish terms, is it the meiser, the totzah? Is it the deed of the intercourse or the result that there is a foreign DNA that's being introduced into the equation?
Exactly.
So if I understand the classical, or all these things are relatively recent, but I guess sort of classical issue in the 20th century with artificial insemination, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're having the semen produced by a third party. Rav Moshe, I believe, was a proponent specifically of using a non-Jew. That way you wouldn't run into incest issues. But what comes up, and I think that you're addressing the surrogacy, is what if there's a deficiency not on the man's end, but on the woman's end? And then, so do you want to tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to point out, artificial insemination, by the way, AI was popular in our circles before artificial intelligence became so popular.
Yeah.
In our circles was always artificial insemination, but it can be for a husband also, right? In this Abra Bambati, the sugya is where a woman gets pregnant because she went into the bathtub and therefore sperm entered her body. Now that could be the husband's sperm, right? So when you're dealing with a husband and a wife who, let's say, need to do minimal treatment, let's say an IUI, which is an intrauterine insemination, the husband's sperm, we're not introducing a third party yet, but even the husband himself is using the sperm to inseminate his wife. So there's a discussion in the poskim from years ago, from hundreds of years ago. What's the status of fatherhood, of paternity in that case where the couple, we're not in, again, no third party, just his sperm and her egg, but the form of conception took place outside of the normal realm of intimacy and intercourse, but rather through some type of assisted, what we call assisted reproductive technique.
Right. So the stakes aren't as high as there's no mamzerus question per se, but it's a question of yichus. Like, is this Ruvain's son? That's the question.
But when we deal with when we're dealing with AI, artificial insemination, or egg donation or surrogacy, so then you're actually introducing a third party. So it's true of Moshe has his chuvas about, let's say, foreign sperm, a donor sperm. But let's talk about the female for a moment. A
Hmm.
woman may use a third party for one of two, in one of two ways. Either she needs an egg, right? A woman needs an egg, a couple needs an egg in order to have a baby. You need an egg and you need sperm. Now, if a woman doesn't have her own eggs, or if her own eggs aren't healthy, they're not viable, and she wants to get pregnant, so then she may need to look to a third party donor to give her eggs so that she could then use those eggs with her husband's sperm. That's what we call egg donation. Surrogacy, or what's most accurately referred to as gestational carrier, is when, let's say, you have a couple, her eggs are viable, his sperm is viable. It's just that there's a uterine factor issue. She doesn't have a uterus for whatever reason, maybe because she had cancer and the uterus was taken out. Maybe she was born without a uterus. There can be multiple reasons why a woman, or she has a uterus, but she has certain autoimmune issues that reject every pregnancy. So there could be a whole host of reasons why a woman would need to look into surrogacy. But suppose they're looking into surrogacy now, they have their own embryo. It's her egg and his sperm, Jewish, healthy, wonderful, a great, beautiful Jewish embryo. It's just that they don't have a womb, they don't have a uterus to host and to actually bring that embryo to fruition, to live birth. So they would hire a surrogate, a gestational carrier, to take that embryo, bring the baby through the pregnancy to the live birth, and then the couple would, what we call the intended parents, would get that baby at the end of the day.
Right. And I can imagine the big question that arises from here is, well, it's the official mother's egg, but it's you'll give me the technical scientific terms, but it's essentially developing in another woman's body.
Correct.
And the question is, from a halachic, not from an emotional standpoint, that's understandable, but from a halachic standpoint, who do we attribute the baby to in terms of the yichus? And I guess the question is, do we even have any precedent in halacha for such a question?
Great point that you're raising. I heard that Rabbi Shlomo Zalman once commented that he can find a Gemara, a Talmudic source, to support any question that you throw his way, with one exception. Who is the mother?
Wow.
When we have this situation where we have, because of the technology that IVF has brought to the table, where we can actually divorce and separate the birth mother from the egg mother, the genetic mother, from the one who actually carries the baby. So we always, up until that point, we took it as a given. You're Jewish because your mother is Jewish. But now, the moment where we introduce multiple women into the equation, so when we say mother, and we say that I'm Jewish because my mother is Jewish, what does that actually mean? Does it mean that my mother was the one who carried me and gave birth to me, and that's why she's my mother, and that's why I'm Jewish? Or is it, no, it has nothing to do with her as a gestational carrier? Sometimes people refer to it as the incubator, right? She's just an incubator, allowing for the embryo with, remember, the embryo's genetics, it was there from day one, right? From the moment that egg was fertilized, all of the genetics, both him and her, are there. The gestational carrier, the woman, the womb that's carrying this baby, is allowing the pre-existing genetics and the fetus to develop, but they're not necessarily introducing anything new into the genetic sequence of the child. They're not introducing anything new into the very makeup of the baby, but they're certainly allowing the development to go from the fetal, from the embryonic stage to the fetal stage, to actual becoming a live baby. So
Right.
it's
And
not like they're
definitely,
doing nothing.
mitzad svara, logically, we could definitely frame it as such. But the big question is our preconceived, or is our end result that we want, is that actually what halacha says? And I guess, this is mainly an audio podcast, so our listeners are always welcome to reach out to me directly. I hope it's okay if I share the excerpt that we're looking at. The reason that, Rabbi Segelman, in addition to your scholarship, the reason that we're doing this on a Shalos at Shuvos podcast is because PUAH actually puts out their own Shilos Utshuvos, so to speak.
Yeah.
And there's a tshuva that they have that you provided me with, which deals with this question of surrogacy. And I was wondering, to the best that we can, without actually assuming our listeners are looking at the text in front of them, can you just tell us what's the structure of a typical PUAH tshuva? You could use this one as an example, of course. And how is it different than our typical Tzitz Eliezer or Mishnah Halachos that we might open?
Sure. The set is called Shut PUAH. Okay, pretty original name, Shut PUAH, and it's really, in my opinion, I try to be an unbiased opinion. It is one of the most captivating and fascinating svarim that I have on my shelf, and the reason is because Shut PUAH, as you mentioned, is not like your standard, classic, typical shaila and shuva, in which you have a rabbi who's receiving questions and then he's answering them and compiling a sefer of the question and the answer. Our Sefer works a little bit differently. The questions that we have in Sefer PUAH, in Shut PUAH rather, there's another 5-volume set called Sefer PUAH, which is more of a strict halacha, halacha on top and footnote on the bottom. But this is Shut PUAH. Now, Shut PUAH is a compilation of questions that came to PUAH's desk over the years. Fascinating questions, and often questions that have never been asked before, or they're being asked for the very first time in a very public manner. And the way that the Rabbanim at PUAH decided to take this is to take that shaila that PUAH received, that the PUAH rabbis received, and really to blast it out to many different Gedolei HaPoskim. I mean, in these volumes, we have Rabbanim ranging from Rav Chaim Kanievsky and Rav Elyashiv, Rav Asher Weiss, Rav Mendel Shafran, Rabbi Moshe David Tendler, Rabbi Ribiat, Rabbi Greenblatt, many, you name a Rabbi David Cohen, Zolgazun Zayin, so many Rabbanim who are actively poskim in this generation and in the previous one are featured here as receiving the question, have written a response, and now it is now compiled into the Sefer. So the basic structure is that each shaila is presented with, usually it's medically related. So there's a brief medical introduction. So the reader has the necessary medical background in order for them to understand the tshuva. Then there's a basic halachic background. What are the questions that will be discussed in the responses from the Rabbanim, from the Gedolim? What do you have to know in order to understand their tshuva? And then there is a copy of the actual shaila that was presented to the Rabbanim and the responses from the various Rabbanim that they've received. So it comes in like each chapter, let's say, has its own little mini section where that contains the question and multiple responses from the Rabbanim.
Right. So what I like how it's structured is, in addition to the medical information briefly put at the beginning, there's a history of previous literature that gives background to the topic and brings us to the point that we can ask the question that we have. So I'm looking at this over here, and I see that there's important background information even before the tshuvos that are put inside this section. One thing that actually grabbed my attention, you brought up Rav Tendler, Zichrono Livracha. I see in footnote 5 here that there was apparently, whoever put this together spoke with Rav Tendler to ascertain Rav Moshe Feinstein's opinion on the matter, which I would think is very important, because he was dealing with infertility issues in the 20th century, but we don't really know how he's going to deal with the more cutting edge ones of the 21st. So unfortunately, we don't have Rav Tendler with us anymore, but this footnote number 5 here looks really important to me.
Yeah, Rav Tendler was a good friend. I think there was a family member, one of his grandchildren lives in Efrat, and one of the PUAH rabbis, Rabbi Lewis, is a community rabbi in Efrat. So the two of them became close, and he was quickly, Rabbi Tendler was quickly welcomed into the kind of the network of Rabbanim that they sent the shilas to. So there are a number of different tshuvas throughout the various volumes that were sent to Rav Tendler and his responses. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. I will have to track those down. I've been wanting to compile his Hebrew essays that are in like Torah V'Hora and scattered across different journals. So that's good. Now, what I'm really curious about, going back to the issue we stated before, which is you mentioned even Shlomo Zalman Auerbach himself conceded that it was very challenging to find precedent to address this issue. And as I was scanning the literature review at the beginning, what caught my eye was a citation from Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. Now, leaving aside the attribution questions, citing a Targum. I mean, first of all, maybe tell us what the Targum says, and then tell us how is it even possible that we could use Targum Yonasan as a halachic source?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a classic source. It's a great topic for a shir about surrogacy or egg donation during these parashios when we're talking about the birth of the Shvatim, Yosef and Dinah. The Targum Yonasan ben Uziel tells us something fascinating, that originally Leah was pregnant with Yosef and Rachel was pregnant with Dinah. And but Leah had her sons and Rachel didn't have any sons. So the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel tells us that a miracle took place, and there was a switch, a transfer from the womb of Leah to the womb of Rachel and vice versa, and that although Yosef was initially conceived by Leah and Dinah was initially conceived by Rachel, nevertheless the birth was not that way. That Rachel gave birth to Yosef and Leah gave birth to Dinah. And I think almost everyone attributes Rachel as the mother of Yosef and Leah as the mother of Dinah.
Is it their body swapped or their neshamas swapped?
It sounds like their bodies swapped because we're talking about a male and female here.
Right.
So there was an actual switcheroo from one womb to the next. How that happens, it was a divine and miraculous event, but nevertheless, says the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, Rachel gave birth, although she conceived Leah, she gave birth to Yosef, and Leah, although she conceived Yosef, gave birth to Dinah, and now Leah is the mother of Dinah, and Rachel is the mother of Yosef.
So this source would make it sound like the incubator, to borrow the term that you used before, the woman who's carrying the baby to term, is the halachic mother.
100%. The poskim do point this out, Tzitz Eliezer and others. I'll tell you a personal story. I was sitting in Rav Ruvain Feinstein's home in Staten Island, and we were discussing, this is a few years ago, and we were discussing this question, and I asked him, I said, Rav Ruvain, who is the mother? When we're dealing with a case of surrogacy, a case of egg donation, I said, how do you determine motherhood? And he said, the birth mother. And I said, with all due respect, what is the Rav's proof? What's the Rav's raya? And he said, Targum Yonasan ben Uziel.
Oh,
wow. I said, Rav Ruvain, I said, but what about the fact that that the authenticity of the source? Because the Gemara tells us that Rav Targum Yonasan ben Uziel is a very, very early source. But the question is, this our modern day text, is that actually what he said? He said that's all noise.
But here's the thing. I would go a step further. Even leaving the academic interrogation of the authorship of Targum Yonasan on the side. Let's assume it is Yonasan ben Uziel.
Not a halachic sefer.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah,
so we're using a Targum for a halachic shaila.
Yes.
Even if it is Yonasan ben Uziel.
Yes. I asked him that as well, and he felt that it was compelling. Now,
this is the issue, because when the Satmar Rebbe criticized his father-in-law, Ramosha, the Satmar Rebbe was employing hashkafic, agadic kind of arguments, and Ramosha was the one who was sticking to the halacha.
Yeah,
so it
exactly.
seems exactly. I don't want to say inconsistent.
I asked Rav Ruvain, is this really a source? Is this a halachic source? And he felt it was compelling. He felt that the Medrash, the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, quoting the words of Chazal, and he felt that it was very, very compelling, and it can be used as a source of halachic psak. He did say, though, I do need to point out to the listenership that and we didn't get to this point yet, but since there is a dispute about this, and he recognized that there are other opinions, and he realized that this is just a Targum Yonasan, not just a Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, but it is not a classic halachic primary source. So he did feel that it might be good to err on the side of caution and be kind of choshesh and be careful for the other opinions. But I asked him his opinion, his personal opinion, and his halachic opinion. He felt that the birth mother is the mother, the woman who carries the baby, the gestational carrier. She is actually the halachic mother, and he felt that this was a good source. Wow. Anecdotally, parenthetically, I heard that Rav Hershel Schechter told me once that was the opinion of Rav Moshe. He said he was once. He said he was schmoozing. I'll quote you. He said he was schmoozing with an old Yid in Muncie. That was the way Rav Schechter presented it to me. He was schmoozing once with an old Yid in Muncie who had told him that he had presented the shaila to Rav Moshe, and Rav Moshe had answered that the birth mother is the mother.
Wow.
And that's also the opinion of Rav Shmuel first, who's a Dayan in Chicago, also a well-known Talmud, well-known student of Rav Moshe Feinstein. So
Wow.
I asked Rav Ruvain whether this was the opinion of Rav Moshe, and he wasn't 100% sure whether he had heard it from Rav Moshe, but things came together when I informed Rav Ruvain that that was Rav Shmuel's first psak, and I had actually heard this in the name of Rav Moshe. He was delighted to hear that everyone in the Rav Moshe camp was thinking
And I
thinking
think I think that footnote from Rev Tendler before seems to support that as well. So it
yeah,
seems consistent. Now,
yeah,
as I like to say on the podcast, time flies when you're learning Torah.
yeah.
Maybe just break it down for us. So, what are the other shitos? What's the other side, and how does this come to play in the tshuva?
Sure. So this tshuva, it's actually interesting. There aren't too many rabbanim who weigh in on this, and I think it's partially because it was from one of the older tshuvas.
Mm,
Uh, it's interesting to learn how many contemporary rabbanim are weighing in on the issue and are answering shilas related to surrogacy and egg donation because it is such a prevalent issue. It is such a relevant, prevalent, and important, timely issue that rabbanim need to address. That they need to address. There are so many couples, young and old, who have no other option of getting pregnant other than third-party reproduction. And when the shaila first came out, it was clear that many rabbanim shied away. They really didn't want to get involved. One of the tshuva begins though. This tshuva begins with two letters from Rav Mordechai Eliyahu. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu was the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. He was really the halachic impetus and the halachic backbone of PUAH. He was actually one who started it, together with Rav Menachem Borstein, who's the current head and founder and head of PUAH. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu really was the visionary who understood that the Jewish community needs an organization to specialize in fertility, to identify all of the questions, to identify all of the shilas, and come up with real halachic, direction. That was Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, and there are two tshuvas here from Rav Mordechai Eliyahu that speak of his opinion and also his support of the organization and the rabbanim who are answering the shilas. But Rav Mordechai Eliyahu's opinion was crystal clear, similar to what we have attributed to Rav Moshe, that the one who carries the baby is the mother.
hmm.
Crystal clear.
And is there anyone who takes the other side in these
Yes.
tshuvas?
Yes.
Okay.
So in now the tshuva, in the tshuva they quote here from Rav Ehrentreu from England, Rav Hancock Ehrentreu, who brings the other opinion, but he concludes that it is the egg mother, who
Huh.
is the mother and not the birth mother. Then we have a tshuva from Rav Ephraim Greenblatt, who is another Talmud of Rav Moshe, and yet again we find that the mother is the one who gives birth,
Mm.
to the baby, and Rav Shoel Israeli as well opines,
So
and he
So if I may, so what's the I get the Targum Rabbi Yonah ben Uziel is not necessarily the strongest makor, but it's better, I guess, than nothing. What does the other side have to support arguing that it's the egg mother?
that's a good question. Um, there are the Gemara in Nida and Daf Lamed talks about three shutfin, gimel shutfin ba'adam. There are three partners when it comes to making a baby: the father, the mother, and Hakadosh Baruch Hu. And there, the Gemara really delineates and really discusses what the various contributions are. The husband contributes the white substance, and the woman contributes the red substance, and what that actually means for the baby's production. So some poskim look to that as as a source that you see that the actual creation of the embryo, the creation of the DNA, the genetics, the actual development of the vlad, of what the baby will look like, is coming from the father. That what makes you a father is that you're the contributor, and what makes you the mother is that you are the contributor, right? And Hakadosh
So
Baruch Hu just puts that all to life.
right. So this reminds me of the sugya of intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
Where also there is a dearth of ample halachic precedent. So both sides are busy flipping through all shots, almost. I don't think it's. I hope it's not disrespectful for me to say, but like grasping at straws,
Right,
trying to find something, even a non-halachic source.
right, correct.
Um, so we have an Agadita in was it Kiddushin or wherever it was, and we have a Targum, Yonasan ben Uziel. Let's just say it's
Right,
Yonasan ben Uziel for argument's sake.
right, right.
So I guess the question is, right? So I have the shoot PUAH here. I have the overview. I have all of these different shuvos in here. Um, what is the purpose at this point? What should the layperson? What should the shul rav? What should we be doing with all this information now that we have all these different views?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the Sefer is functional and as actually is an asset to everyone. The layman, someone who never finds themselves either going through these particular questions or never posketing these specific shilas. I mean, the shilas in this book, you just go through the table of contents. It's just mind boggling. It's just so fascinating. From a boy who was a donor, a sperm donor when he was non-religious, and then he was choser b'tshuva. He became a bal tshuva. How does he do tshuva knowing that he has sperm in a sperm bank, and now he wants to? Is he obligated to go back to the bank and
Oh wow.
buy back the sperm? Do we say that he should find a Jewish woman that he can inseminate with that sperm so that at least it wouldn't be like retroactively, right? It wouldn't be considered spilling of seed and it would be contributing to a Jewish baby and it would be kind of a proof. We're like, how does such a person do
This
full
is wild.
tshuva?
This is like, this puts like case in the Gemara like Rashia bar Rashia to shame, all these
Yeah,
traditions.
exactly. And you have cases of ambiguous genitalia of a you have when the baby's genitalia looks one way but the DNA claims it's the other way. So do we go after the what we see with our eyes or do we value the genetic
Oh,
component?
it's Eliezer had some
So
as well.
Yezer has a
Right.
tshuva about that transgender. Yeah, I'm sure we discussed it. I mean, so many different questions, fascinating questions. So a layperson can just read this tshuva and read this through the tshuvas, and you will walk away absolutely mind boggled. Just how fascinating the shilas are, and the fact that the rabbanim, how creative the talmidei chachamim who are asked, the gedolim, how they're able to bring Shas to life with these various new cutting edge questions, how showing us how deeply rooted our Torah is and how you could find these shilas even in Shas. But for the posek, for the ones who are getting the shilah, and I get shilas from many different rabbanim asking, have you ever written about this topic? Have you ever written about that topic? It's such an important work because rabbanim can look through the tshuvas, they can see how the rabbanim think. I'll give you another example in what we're talking about. There are many rabbanim who say that the egg mother is the mother. Why? Because that's where the DNA is. That's what the genetics are. As we said before, the carrier, all she's doing is bringing the egg to fruition. She's bringing that to the finish line, but she's not actually contributing in any genetic or any physical way other than the actual birth or the growth and development of the baby. But everything was kind of predetermined when the husband's genetics, his chromosomes mixed with the woman's chromosomes. So that's a svara to say like you could talk to me about birth from today until tomorrow, but the genes, that's where it's at. The DNA is what's kovea. So
Absolutely.
so what? Let's say you were dealing with this shaila as a rav. So look through the chuvas, you see how it's packaged, and you'll see the different sources that the rabbanim bring, that the gedolim bring as a proof text and not, and then that could help you develop your own psak or help you develop kind of a direction where else to look, what to look into further to help you develop the appropriate psak for a specific
It's
couple.
a remarkable repository, and I think it gives a certain sense of not just halachic guidance, but I think it gives a little bit of, I would think, some sort of emotional reassurance to know that if someone's facing a certain complicated question, a lot of these things are done privately, and
Yeah,
I understand completely why they're done privately. But to see that I'm not the first one to be going through this, this has at least been addressed, maybe not to my liking, but it's been addressed. I think that gives some kind of menuchas and nefesh, I would hope. But
yeah.
I think we have about 2 minutes left. So maybe what I would ask is just in our conclusion, we've been dealing a lot, I think, from a more academic angle. We've been dealing with the halachic questions of surrogacy and infertility. This is understandably so a very visceral, a very strong, emotional topic as well, because people go through pain that cannot be described and put properly into words. And what would your message be to the people who come to seek the guidance of PUAH or who would benefit from it?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head that there are so many people who feel alone. There are so many people who feel like their situation is so unique. It is so isolating to feel that, I just have nowhere to turn. Our message is clear that the situation that you're experiencing, the questions that you're asking have been asked, and people have gone through the situation, and PUAH is able to help. The fact that there is an organization, a resource for the Jewish community in any area of your struggle or your journey, whether it's the medical, whether it's halachic, emotional, financial, wherever you feel that you may be alone, and maybe it's in all of those categories, that the Jewish community should be aware of the fact that the experts in Jewish fertility have the resources available to help you. That PUAH, the experts in fertility, can help you with your medical issues, can help you with your halachic issues, and with the emotional, with the financial. And just as a proof, look how much learning has taken place over the years. Look how much research has been done dedicated to these types of questions and these situations. I'll say it's an absolute honor and privilege for me to be the rabbinic director of PUAH, and to be able to help the Jewish community and service the Jewish community in this way is nothing short of an absolute blessing. So thank you so much for having me on this podcast, and for giving me the opportunity to share Shut PUAH with you and your listenership. There are 5 volumes. They actually just published a few weeks ago a kuntres called PUAH L'Puriat Gever, which is urological shilas, all different types of urological shilas, to Adaka and whatnot.
So,
Just
you'll send me some links, and we'll put links to resources of PUAH, God willing, in the show notes. That way,
Great.
anyone who would need to avail themselves of what PUAH has to offer will know where to go. And just thank you for all you do on behalf of Klal Yisrael. This is remarkable work. I knew in general terms what PUAH does, but I have renewed appreciation, and I just look forward to you continuing to help Klal Yisrael in all these ways.
Thank you very much. Hatzlacha to you, and thank
V'chein
you.
lamar.